Welcome to the Prof Talk Pod, brought to you by the Engaged Professor. Every 2 weeks, join us as we talk about tips and tricks to help you connect with your students, engage with industry, and stay up to date on all the teaching trends. We'll give you actionable strategies that will help improve your teaching today. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to the Prof Talk Pod. My name is Becky Achen, and I'm here today with my co-host, Katie Metz. Katie, say hi.
Hi, Becky. It's good to be back.
We are going to talk today about something we've talked about in the past on the podcast, but I think the last time we talked about it, it was really just my voice, and it's helpful to have other voices on these topics like Katie's, but also talk a little bit about scaffolding in the context of AI in assignments. And especially Katie was telling me before we hopped on that she went to a workshop where they were kind of talking about this concept. And so we're going to talk about that today. Now, just as a review, the main core concept of scaffolding is to build your students toward what you want them to be able to do by giving them more support at the beginning and then slowly giving them less and less support and more of them doing it on their own. And it's really an intentional way you can build actually your entire class from a scaffold perspective, but for sure individual assignments, definitely those bigger projects. And scaffolding is one of my favorite tools, especially in undergraduate classes where students are doing a lot of these things for the first time. But I think it's one of those kind of core, I call it one of the core teaching concepts from
Yeah.
my perspective of how to avoid, honestly, students giving you that look at the end of the semester where they're completely lost. They have no idea what they're supposed to be doing. If that's happening to you, it might be a little bit you and not just your students, because you might not have given them the steps to get where you want them to go. So, Katie, I would actually love for you to tell us a little bit about the workshop that you went to.
Oh,
And
yeah. So, well, the idea of scaffolding, I think, is something we've talked about a lot as professors, as teachers, as pedagogical learners and doers for so long. And recently, it was framed to me in a slightly different way, which is thinking about the integration of AI tools into scaffolding. So at my school, my school in particular, the business school at IU Bloomington, has been very focused on integrating AI into all levels of teaching, research, service, inputs, and outputs. And I think I'll just kind of say that first, this episode is not about AI, but there are some useful components that this workshop got me thinking about, which is within the scaffolding approach, that foundational piece of teaching. What are the components of those learning outcomes that our students need to master kind of verbatim on their own versus what tools can AI assist, or what how can students, maybe to flip this a little bit, use AI tools to assist them with certain tasks? So more comprehensive pieces. And it got me thinking, I was talking to one of my colleagues about this, about these like exit interviews. We always say, joking, not joking, that I definitely talked about this on the podcast. Like, I wish I just, my only grade in the class was every student comes and talks to me for 10 minutes about what they learned in the class. And in this perspective, we're thinking about scaffolding as what are the foundational terminologies that I would say, ooh, how do you not know that? Like when you leave my class, like I just expect for them to have as part of their vocabulary, versus where could they be thinking about using, I would say, the AI tool of their choice, generative or not, to be a thought partner in applying higher level thinking to the content. And that part, I'm not going to say it's optional, but definitely leads to some more optional higher order thinking, kind of like we were talking about. If they don't know the foundations, they get to the end and they're so confused. That was a miss at the foundational level, not at the higher order thinking, and not something that AI could teach them, right? So yeah, I went to this workshop on Thursday about kind of assessment design in that scaffolding area, and thought that was very interesting feedback, food for thought for us as we continue to talk about the scaffolding approach in teaching and classroom design.
Well, and I think as we think about how to get started with scaffolding, that's a good way. What is the core thing? And I know that you'll have learning objectives, and those learning objectives sometimes aren't always as clear as to how you might build an assignment around them. So I love that idea of foundational knowledge. Like, what is the thing that when students need to know and understand to be able to be effective at this assessment? And then how do I create activities that help them build that foundational skill and knowledge so that when they get to the assessment, they're going to be successful? What that's really when it comes to building toward, especially on a whole class level, but certainly on a assignment level, what what do I need to do to build them toward being able to do that? Not if I just tell them all these things and then I give them the assessment, they're going to be able to do it.
Yes.
What is that foundational knowledge and skill?
Well, and not to make it and especially, in a technical topic, not to make it a memorize and regurgitation, right? That's how I think scaffolding is very useful is if we're treating topics like actual foundational knowledge rather than you have to memorize this number, then or memorize this concept, then when they get to those higher order pieces, it's much more natural for them to be thinking about, right? So they regurgitate and then forget on an exam, in other words, even if they really did need that knowledge to retain that knowledge for whatever the next step was.
Well, and I think that's a really good point because sometimes when we say scaffolding and you're like, well, I give exams. So, like, I can't really scaffold their knowledge, but you can, especially if you use the exam as an application exercise, not necessarily as a memorization, regurgitation exercise, then you can scaffold them toward being able to do that next level of thinking in the way that you do your in class assignments or the way you ask quiz questions and how those evolve to kind of get them to those higher level of thinking.
Yeah, and you sort of have to be able to do that, right? Because like in an exam based class, that exam, so say you have 3 exams throughout the semester, those 3 exams are summative evaluations of their performance. But scaffolding incorporates the formative pieces as well, the low stakes, repetitive learning that is formative that helps them get to the point where they can successfully complete the exam. And my personal take, it might be a hot take, is that if your students aren't performing well on exams consistently, perhaps that's because there is not enough lower order repetition in built into your classroom. So we think about the scaffold, but the foundation is what I'm talking about. That um, the teaching them how to think about your topic to begin with, repeating concepts over and over, teaching them where those repetition of concepts are going to fit in. I don't give exams in my class in any of my classes. I'll use my federal tax class as an example here because that's the one I use the most in this on this podcast. Once if they were to take an exam in my class after, unit 2, the stuff they learned on there continues to unit 3. And so they can't just sort of cram for this exam and forget it and move on because then they're going to be missing the foundational knowledge that summative assessment as a checkpoint gave them to move on to the next level of thinking. And it's like it's not a thing for them to be like, "Oh, I forgot it all. Let's move on." Right?
Yeah,
Uh,
I would love for you to walk us through an assignment that you feel like and talk through your process for scaffolding it. And I'll do the same when you're done.
yeah, sure. So my whole class is designed. I'll just, like I said, use federal tax. My whole class is designed as a scaffolding approach. I've modified the extent to which I do active learning versus asynchronous learning. It's a technical topic. And so where I've landed now is my students watch a short introductory video every week about the topic. It's low stakes, it is broad level, it is just Kaltura, me talking for 15 or 20 minutes about the topic for the week with some slides. Then they take a 5-point pre-class topic checkpoint. It's a quiz, but they like the word checkpoint better. That literally just says, to what extent did you absorb the material that I talked about in that video? So the idea is they come into my class every week with foundational knowledge about that topic for the week. So then we have a chance to move into the details, into some of the explanations, into some of the nuances of that content. We do a whole lot of practice problems, not for points, just practice example exercises during class, a lot of illustrating. And then they do a small team based activity for points to close out each class session. So the idea is they're watching an overview, taking the quiz, coming in, learning much more about that topic, 45 minutes per day about that topic, and then finishing off by reinforcing the content, doing a low stakes team exercise. And they do that every week that we have content. And then I have 3 module conclusions. At those module conclusions, I have a checkpoint, which is the terminology, basically the foundational knowledge. To what extent did you figure it out? And a more application based case. Now apply it to a client scenario. This has evolved a lot. I used to have longer videos, and I also used to have post class topic checkpoints. So every week they would repeat that. I got feedback both ways from about both of those things. The feedback about the post class topic checkpoint, we forget to do it. It feels redundant. We had to learn this stuff. So I moved that to a module conclusion checkpoint. The feedback about the videos was we feel like we're not getting enough of you in the class telling us what we need to know. And so I shortened the videos, made them very broad level. Here's what you're about to find out. But you come in with a whiff of knowledge, and made the in-class conversations much more comprehensive. But that the way the reason I do it this way is then there are no surprises when they get to the module conclusion. Like let's do individual tax as an example. In units 3, 4, and 5 in my class, which in the semester is 3 weeks, we start with gross income and we walk through every single step of that income tax formula all the way down to tax refund or tax due. Then when they get to the practical application, they get literally a workbook and a client scenario. Start with gross income, work all the way down to tax due or tax refund. So we're doing it in pieces. Then they put it together and see how it all works. And I have found that to be, especially in a class that they say feels like a foreign language to them, a very useful mechanism for repetition throughout the semester, culminating with something that they've definitely seen before if they've been alive in my class.
Yeah, that's a really good example of like see it, do it, right? Like
Yes, yes.
let me show you what this looks like. And sometimes you can even do that with like see it, do it with a partner, do it on your own
Mhm.
to make that repetition and like pull away some of that support slowly. I always think those are really effective ways, especially for technical things. Like that's something they literally might have to do someday.
Right, exactly, and they can see it all come together. One of their complaints I know about exams in those classes, I don't give exams, but, that other colleagues have in the past or do, is they're just seeing the tax law or whatever it may be in piecemeal. So they're, like, producing this number here and figuring out this percentage over here, but they don't have a good sense of how it all flows together, and that's really important to me because it's a process, right? And then we take a lot of that knowledge from units 3 through 5 and move on with units, starting with unit 6, into more depth about those foundational topics. So they know that they have a baseline, and it creates a good buy-in for me. This is how the class progresses. We're not talking about isolated topics the whole semester. Makes me, I feel like, a better instructor when I can tell them that we're building on topics we've talked about before. So I think scaffolding for me in that sense is twofold. It's the assessment design built as low stakes, repetitive, and then on to high stakes, but it's also content design, which is everything we talk about is based on something we've done before.
Well, I also think about that example there in terms of like foundational. There are a lot of complicated scenarios in the real world, right?
Mhm.
Around doing that simple thing that you just said, but they don't. They need to understand it at the easiest case possible. There are no complications. Here's this. Can you do that? If you can do that, then we can start to talk about what happens when it gets more complicated.
Yes, exactly.
That's a
Exactly.
really good example. And if you have the luxury of having, like, in-person sessions, you can also have it be, like, Q&A with you about what they struggled with, what they needed help with, and that's another support that you give them prior to the exam so that they get a chance to not only try it, but then figure out why they're not getting it. And you can help them do that. So that's another good way, I think, to use that. That's similar. If you teach a similar area like Katie does, that would have a similar example. I think that's a good way to do that. I love that idea.
Mhm.
And I feel like sometimes we talk about these concepts in pedagogy, like scaffolding, and it's like, well, that sounds very technical. It's actually really fairly basic. Like you have to have building blocks. We all need help. We all get better at things the more we do them. Like from being a
Yes.
child, right? So, like, it's a pretty easy concept, but it's easy to skip over when you're a subject matter expert because things are second nature
Mhm.
to you. And we can easily forget that students might need more support early on because it is not going to be second nature to them.
Well, and also that, they might need to hear it more than once,
Yeah.
and maybe in different formats. So one of the things that I have found, I did not even realize this, my students continue to say, I've done this updated format for my tax class for a while, 7-ish years, is that they like that they can go back to the video and reference
Yeah.
things. And so even though the video isn't the core content of the class, having the ability to go back and refer to a previous resource is a really useful mechanism for them. I'm not trying to sort of slam myself or others, but they're not going to read the book, not very much at least, right? And so if I can give them a tangible, credible, easy access resource to use, they're much more likely to do that and to retain that. And they can go back to any of the videos at any time. It doesn't have to be just the one from this week.
Yeah, someday we'll have to do an episode on encouraging students to read once I figure out exactly how to do that effectively. I've tried lots of things, but it is a challenge for sure. So
Yeah.
we'll put that in our back pocket because
There you go.
maybe we'll have to find a guest that can help give us their input on that one. So this is something I tried this after I taught a class for quite a few semesters. It was a basic marketing class. It was a for the business school where I used to teach. It was a requirement, and that for all students. And I was giving exams in it because it was like part of the business core, and it felt like there was very specific things and terminology that they should have an understanding of. And I generally don't give exams across most of my classes, but I was giving one in that class and didn't love how that was going in a post AI, generative AI world. And so had an idea where I could build that to be more of a like look at marketing concepts in your day-to-day life. How are they showing up in your day-to-day life? And build what used to be three exams into three essentially scaffolded by higher thinking, order of thinking assessments. There were unit assessments. They're usually over 5 or 6 chapters. And so the first one, they all they had to do was recognize marketing concepts in their day-to-day life and explain how they knew that was an example of the thing, right? And they'd have a picture
Right.
of it and they'd show me the picture and they'd say, here's the example of this. And then in our second unit, they did that and then also had to apply two concepts about target audience to okay, you see this concept, you notice this advertisement was for this group. Now apply the idea of a target audience to determine what target audience would be most effective for this advertisement. And then their third one, they had to analyze and evaluate the marketing strategy and determine whether that marketing strategy was effective and why they think it was, and then what was one idea they would have to make it more effective. So not only did we like scaffold throughout the semester to get to be able to do those assessments, but the assessments themselves built on each other over the class. So we didn't start right away. Like I could have asked them right
Right.
away to analyze and evaluate, but 3 weeks in, 4 weeks into a marketing course, can I expect them to probably not, right? So you can also think about
Right.
that.
It also gives them an opportunity to check their work. So if something went wrong or they didn't quite get the concept in the first component, they have a chance to, when they add onto it, to perhaps modify what they did before or to change their line of thinking or to come up with a new idea. And so it gives a lot of fluidity and flexibility in that sense, where they're not just producing an answer and like that's it. And I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but that's what I did and I move on. So I really like that, Becky, especially from the perspective of having them self reflect and evaluate every time they add a step.
Well, and it was one of those things where as I was thinking about that class, I was not happy with the exam part. It
Yeah,
wasn't. And when I was looking at my
yeah,
learning objectives, like the core learning objective for that class was for students to realize how big marketing is and how it's integrated into most any company, I mean, it's everywhere in your life all the time. It's like, well, if that's what I want them to be able to do, why don't I just ask them to do it as their main assessment for whether they understand these concepts? And it really, I was really happy with the outcome of it. Students, it was an online synchronous course, but online, and it didn't get a ton of feedback from student evaluations to find out how they felt about it. And it's a little hard because they didn't do exams and this, they just did this, so they can't necessarily compare. But
right,
the depth of their responses would indicate that they had a better understanding. And I was pretty tough on, like, this has to be an example, like a screenshot from your phone, right? Like, not some
right.
random website that maybe you visited, but like tell me, and they had to tell me where they encountered it and why they encountered it. So it wasn't just like I just had to find 10 examples on the internet, which I really like that. So I think about scaffolding from that perspective too, is like, how do I build order of thinking across the whole course so that the whole thing becomes a let's slowly move you up to be a little bit more autonomous and to be have a little bit more I don't know what the right word is right now, but to have a little bit more um, challenge as you go throughout the course.
Yeah. It also, you mentioned learning outcomes. I love learning outcomes. I love assurance of learning so much. And one of the things it does is helps you assess to the extent to which like you're doing them, right? We are at our school. I'll have to update you at a new episode later on about how we're going to do this and how successful it's going to be. But starting fall 2026, our entire school is going to be required to implement Canvas outcomes into all of our courses, our course design and implementation. And it will be an automatic report that goes with our student evaluation and teaching numbers to talk about the extent to which our students are actually learning in our class. It's going to be a whole lot of effort to get moving, but one of the things that will come out of it is, to what extent, I don't know if I was doing a great job teaching that particular learning outcome because it's showing up in my exams as a particularly low uh, correct response rate, right? So a lot of room in the scaffolding approach for reflection on the gaps in knowledge that your students have, and not just, I got to emphasize that more, maybe some redesign. Just went through this in my federal tax class with my graduate assistant, was really helpful, going, when I take the CPA exam, there's this one topic that we don't really cover in federal tax, so we don't have time. It's really important on the exam. And I thought, okay, I might be able to rearrange, redesign a little bit to integrate it more effectively instead of going, I don't have time to come to talk about that. I ran out of time, whatever it may be. So that's some food for thought as well.
Well, I think that's a good example of ways to recognize if you've got a concept that actually needs more scaffolding, right? If it's something, if you use exams as assessments, or even if you have a project and you get to the end and you're grading them and you're like, wow, this is not the quality I expected. This students are
Yeah,
not being able to put A and B together. Um, that is an opportunity to look at, okay, well, how did I support them to get them ready to do the thing I want them to do?
right.
Because the telling them and having them do readings and listening to lectures is not going to get them the confidence to be able to do any kind of application. Like, that's just not going to happen on its own. And so that's a good way to identify if you're not happy with the assessment, is it outcomes? Is it also that maybe you need to redesign or rethink about how you approached trying to teach that whole idea, that whole concept?
Totally, totally true.
So as we think about scaffolding, and I know I wanted to circle back, I didn't want to make the whole episode about AI, but there are some opportunities to use AI as a tool to help students move as that support tool, right? So it might be that instead of asking students to develop something right away, like develop a marketing plan for a business, maybe you use AI to develop a fake one, and then you have them do some work on identifying concepts in it and then
Yes,
evaluating how successful they think they will be. Like, as opposed to, I think what, and I'm talking about that in the context of marketing because that's a common assignment in, an intro marketing class or really in a lot of different types of marketing classes to create a plan. And we kind of think if we just tell them what the concepts mean, then they'll be able to create the plan. And
right.
AI actually gives us an opportunity to help bring them along the creation by
Right.
having them first see something that they can evaluate and think about, would this work, would this not work, and why? Which I think
Yeah.
is a great use of AI as an assist tool.
Yeah, the revision piece of this too, right? If they see something, they're identifying, evaluating this, and then they go create something on their own. AI is a really useful tool in helping them engage in the revision process. I think, as with anything in AI, prompt engineering is the most important thing. So if you're going to integrate these types of tools into your class, if you're going to tell your students that AI is a component of your scaffolding approach, you need to teach them how you want prompt engineering to go in your class. You need to tell them expectations and best practices in marketing field or whatever field you're in for how they should be engaging with AI instead of just use AI to go do this, right? That is definitely, I think, the key when we're thinking about scaffolding in bringing meaning into AI as a thought partner with our students. They have access to so many different tools and so many different I mean, just endless resources, and it can turn into a socioeconomic equity battle, big time. Tell them how you want them to use it based on your own experiences, and you'll have a much more fruitful and productive output, I think, for them or process even.
Yeah, and that's on that note, the prompt part could be something you choose to scaffold too, right? Is like you give them a
Yes,
really
absolutely.
specific outline of how you want them to engage, and then you slowly say, okay, you've practiced this. Now here's a different assignment. How would you use AI to help support a more higher quality outcome? I'm talking a little bit in generalities just because that outcome is going to be different for every class that you teach. And there might be some classes where that's not an appropriate integration, that you might choose to not let them use it at all, and that's fine. But there are certainly ways that AI can help them advance along a continuum in learning and understanding. And even like the one, I've got some students who've used it in the past who've said, I uploaded my assignment into it and asked AI to tell me, according to the rubric, how did I do? What did I get wrong? What did I
Mhm.
get right? I think that's a really great way for them to see AI as a tool to support and make their stuff better. The challenge, of course, is they have to have some foundational knowledge to know to
Right.
evaluate the feedback that they're getting, right?
Yeah.
Um, and occasionally it will happen where a student will say, "Well, AI said that was better," and I'll be like, "Well, it's not. It's not in the context of what we were trying to learn because you're not understanding the foundational thing that AI told you. What it really told you to do was this, but
Right.
because you don't have that foundational knowledge, you took it in a different way, and because you didn't know any better, you didn't ask it to clarify because you didn't know any better.
Well,
So
and
there's
that's
some learning there
yes,
too."
I definitely agree, and getting them to think about their AI use in that context of scaffolding especially, as not secretive, but
Yeah, yeah.
rather collaborative, and I think the more we talk about it, I go into tax class all the time and I go, "Hey, by the way, ChatGPT is, like, real bad at this topic today." I say today. I asked it a question and, because it's like, I'm using it, here's how you're using it. Let's have a conversation about it. I'm saying this term a lot, but it being a thought partner rather than some secretive way where we feel like we're cheating every time we use it. Because it
One,
is a very valuable tool in scaffolding.
I think that's an important point too, is making sure that if you are encouraging your students to use it, that you're turning back around and saying that you're allowed to question what you get as an output.
Yes.
Like that is part
Yes.
of this process. That's why I want you to engage in it and not just take it as truth. And if you can't identify in it what is good about it, then
Right.
we're not where we need to be in the class,
Yeah.
right? And I've really been switching into that as a means for using AI as a partner to get students to move forward in their thinking process because they can get an answer out of it, sure, but can they tell me why that answer is the right answer is a different question, and I think that is really helping move through some of those challenges.
Yeah, because you're right. They should be engaging with it, not using it one way.
Right, right. I think it'll be interesting to see, I think, how that evolves. I know,
I
and this is
agree.
not something that I have done yet, although I'm thinking about doing for a class this summer, but a lot of people have built tools, GPTs within ChatGPT
Yeah,
that help students through tasks in their classrooms.
we're working on
And
it right now in our
right.
school.
I think there are a lot of really great implementations of that. Now, this is an aside, but we also will have to then teach students to know about what LLMs are and what they do and how they work as part of understanding the foundations under what they're using. Because I think that's a lot of the challenge right now for students who struggle to get value out of it. It's because they don't quite understand what it does. So you can't talk to it in
Mhm.
the ways that get you quality outputs. And then, Katie, this is probably a question for another time too, or a conversation for another time too. But that equity aspect, I mean, you can see in my classes, I can see when students have the paid version or don't. And
Yeah.
that's an
Oh, you
interesting
can.
concept to think. Yeah, I can usually tell
Interesting.
if they, yeah, because it is enough better, or it's like I'll ask students
Yeah.
intentionally to do something that is more difficult so that it takes like if you had the better model, you're going to get a better output.
Yeah.
And definitely the students who don't have the paid version, and they'll tell me sometimes in their reflections, like, I have the free version, so I don't think it did a very good job of this, which is good that they're recognizing it. That's what I want.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's definitely some equity there in all of these
How
tools in the
much?
future, especially
Oh,
if universities aren't going to pay for licenses for
yeah.
all their students.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Cool. Well, Katie, do you have any final thoughts on scaffolding or approaching scaffolding in classes?
I just think scaffolding is such a good reflective tool. We really touched on that in this episode, and I think that it's a really important point is that scaffolding is obviously a learning tool for your students, but I'm thinking a whole lot, like I said, about learning outcomes and student learning objectives at school level, and it's such a good way for you to reflect on how your process and design in your classes is influencing how students do on those summative assessments.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We talked about it in a couple different ways, but to be honest, if it's something you haven't thought about yet, just start with the show them before you have them do it. Even that simple piece of them seeing it before they do it can make a lot of difference in your class. So that's like a really great way to start. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Prof Talk Pod. Please like, follow, subscribe. This shows up on YouTube. We're on Apple and Spotify or wherever else you get your podcasts. And if you found value in it, would you please drop us a review or give us a rating? That helps us get found by other people who are searching for help on teaching. And we will see you next time.